know what cheese curds, motorcycles, and surf rods have in common? Turns out the best of all come from Wisconsin.
That's right. We're talking the 77-year-old, family-owned American company, St. Croix Rod, where the surf is no part-time business. Offering 41 models across 5 distinct surf series, St. Croix has been designing and handcrafting high-performance, tech-forward surf rods for decades.
Simply put, St. Croix combines the best technology and components with the lengths, powers, and actions demanded by discerning anglers up and down the Striper coast. All this to say that St. Croix is the premier choice for anglers who demand the best rods on earth. Check out the full lineup at stcroixrods.com. Welcome back to another episode of the Surfcast Podcast. Toby, we are inching our way towards the, quote, real fishing season, as I often refer to it. And one of the things that are the harbingers of the, quote, real season are herring. And this conversation we're going to have is sort of a mix, because we wanted to talk about herring, and we have a specific talk that we, a specific topic, that we want to talk about. But we recently got an email from Matt Peel. I'll give him a shout out. And he was asking us about bait fish and how we approach bait fish and the different bait fish, et cetera. And there's a few other things in there. And we get that question a lot. I get that question a lot at seminars, at shows, people bumping into me into a hallway, and they want to ask me specifically about bait. So we're going to talk about herring today specifically. But before we jump into that, I just want to say that bait fish, I'm trying to head off the question that we always get. That's what I'm trying to do, Toby. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
It's a 3, 4, 5, 6 hour long topic, but to try and do it in 30 seconds. Bait fish matter, but they don't really matter to me. The specific bait that's in front of me almost doesn't matter. And when I'm only saying almost because I don't want to get hate mail to say that it doesn't matter. Because really, I am focused entirely on how the spot fishes, how the current fishes, how the structure fishes, how the depth fishes, how the wind fishes. Those are the factors that I'm focused on, because I'm trying to see where the striper is likely to feed and how it's likely to feed based on the advantage that it has. Now, that being said, if I walk down the shore and there's tons and tons of peanuts, that may sort of flavor what I do. If I see mullet, that definitely flavors what I do. Toby, I know with you, specifically even more than me, if you see bunker, that might flavor what you do a little bit. But it's just a flavor. We talked about in a recent episode a soup, and how all these different factors went into a soup that made the striper season start. What makes a spot good is also a soup. And I think that the specific bait fish is only one small piece of that. And that is specific, I think, a little bit to where we fish. I know that, in other places on the Striper Coast, it's more important. And the more sand involved, the more it's important, I think, a little bit. But but not always. I mean, that's not even true necessarily for me. So I just wanted to get that out there before we started talking about herring, that we get this question a lot, and that's kind of how I feel about it. How do you feel about it?
No, I feel the same. I think it's kind of similar to anglers' over obsession with the water temperature. The bait is something they can see. It's something they can work off of. So it's got to be something. And then then you're talking about bait. Well, what bait was in the surf? Well, this. Well, obviously your lure looks like a certain bait, and it's like you continue to build it up and make it into this bigger and bigger thing than it really needs to be, where it now becomes all consuming and you're concentrating too much on it. And is it a piece of it? Yes. But it's not the thing that you need to put all that into. When we were preparing for this, before I started thinking through some of the things I want to talk about with herring, I was adamant in my mind, and I probably said it to people, and I probably said it on the podcast previous to this. No matter what, I don't care about what the bait that's in the water. It does not matter what's going to be there. I'm going to take that back one step and say, as you'll see in this discussion, herring is probably the exception to my rule.
That's right. And I'll jump in on that too. Yes, keep going.
The herring is the presence of herring in the early season surf. I do, let's say, modify my approach and my plug bag to a larger degree than any other bait throughout the rest of the season. So if you want to say outside of when the herring are around, nope, don't care. As long as there's something for striped bass to feed upon, or the potential for them to be in a feeding location, that for me is far more important and what I care about. With the herring, for a variety of reasons, it does weigh in heavily. I mean, it's still not the entire thing, aside from the fact that I am fishing around herring runs, traditional herring areas, traditional areas where the herring might come through. It is in there. So for any time that I said I don't care whatsoever, I apologize and take that back with today's exception.
Yeah, walk that back a little bit. And I agree with that too. I think that, when someone asks about bait fish and, fishing bait fish and that sort of thing, they're sort of asking, what does your plug bag look like? And then how fast do you go, or slow do you go, or deep do you go, shallow do you go? That's kind of what they're asking. And what we're saying, what both of us are saying, is that when it comes to bait fish, we don't modify our plug bag. Our plug bags are built around the spot. Plug bags are built around the conditions. And that's really what we're talking about. Except, and this is where I'm going to agree with you, when it comes to herring, because I do head out with herring bags. I do occasionally head out with mullet bags, but those are more hopeful. And honestly, I end up fishing kind of the same way anyways. But with herring, it's a lot more than hopeful. You, quote, know that the herring's there. Either you've scouted it, or it's just the right time of year and they come back over and over and over and over. They're like one of the most consistent baits, right?
Yeah. But even in their lower numbers, there's still a consistency to it.
Yeah, even in their lower numbers, which is a shame. And I know that they're working on trying to rebuild them, because I'm actually on one of the AP panels for it. But it's not so great, but they do still come back. There's still a lot of bait that comes back, even though it's not what it used to be. Now, we try to keep these conversations pretty specific, though. And one of the things that I have found with herring that I don't think a lot of anglers focus enough on is that herring tend to be in really tight. Herring tend to be in really close. And that's what we really want to focus on today. So to get it started, Toby, I'll give you an example from just last season. I was fishing a spot during a king tide. It might not have been a king tide. It was a very big tide. I don't remember the specifics of it. But it was very early in the season, and the moon was full. And in this particular place, as in so many herring places, I am in the bushes. I'm literally standing practically in the woods. Now, it's not really woods, it's more like shrubs, but I'm standing in the bushes. Like I'm like not in the ocean anymore. I'm on like the land, right? My toes are touching the water, but the tide is so high, right? And I couldn't see the herring most of the time, but I definitely saw some of the V-wakes really close to shore, and I knew. So what I was doing was I was casting down the shoreline with my darter, which isn't necessarily what a lot of guys would reach for when it comes to herring, but they're a great herring imitator. They're very similar size. They move kind of similarly. I was throwing it down, and I was getting fish blowing up on my darter, one rod length, from my feet, which on any other tide would be dry sand by, who knows, and cobble by, 15 feet or whatever. And these fish were pinned to the bushes. So here I am striper fishing in the bushes. And I think that I had this moment of like, file this one away for the podcast or an article, because it's such a good example of herring and how close they are to shore. And if you waded out even to your knees, the fish legitimately behind you. And I may have actually mentioned this on a previous podcast somewhere in Lessons from the Log or something, where I was talking about fish exploding on my lures really close. And I can't remember if I brought it up or not, but that was this particular case. So in the early season, when you're on herring, it really pays to start way back further than you think. This applies to lots of places like sand beaches and stuff too, but when it comes to herring specifically, a lot of anglers want to just charge into the water. And boy, those fish can be really, really tight, right?
Oh yeah, my earliest in my surf casting history involving herring was on the large rivers of New England, where the herring were coming up. So not in the open surf. It wasn't actually until maybe 15-ish, maybe 20 years ago that I actually started to address herring in the open surf side of things. So I was really trained, I learned, I picked up on a lot of things based off of the rivers. And the thing that I learned really early on was exactly what you said. They could be so close that oftentimes when I was first figuring it out and trying these spots, I would step in and wade out, like in the surf, get to as far as I could, and I'd start casting, caught some fish. And there was a guy who used to fish the Connecticut River. He's now passed away, but he was one of my mentors for learning how to fish the spring run, Steve Hopkins. And one day he had told me that no matter what spot he was fishing from shore on the river, his first cast would not be a cast at all. He would take whatever lure he had, and he would drop the lure length. The drop from the rod tip to the lure was down to his reel. That's all the line. No open bail. He would slap the lure down and just let it swing across in front of him at his feet. And he'd do it a couple of times. 4 out of 10 times he would catch a fish, to the point he had a 54-pound striped bass that he caught doing this. So just imagine a 7-foot rod, let's say a 4-foot lead, and a 54-pound striped bass blowing up on your plug of your feet and then ensuing battle. So he told me this story, and it obviously had an impression on me. So that's what I do now when I'm fishing the rivers. When I get to any one of my spots, even if I just move 10 feet up the shore, my first cast is that slap approach where I drop it down, swing it through, and so often there's a big fish waiting right there for it. I bet if you added it up, more striped bass were caught from the surf last year on plastic swimmers than any other plug, probably even more than bucktails. The reason is simple. For generations, the plastic swimmer has proven to be a versatile, effective, and affordable fish catching machine.
And that's where the new Hogy OG Swimmer comes in. Unlike most of the other modern swimmers that all look and act alike, the OG Swimmer brings together a traditional design with modern enhancements to offer anglers with a unique and highly effective swimming plug unlike anything else currently on the market. With a unique wobbling action, it moves like an injured baitfish, and it's a large profile, chunky and tubular, and measuring in at 7 inches. Plus, with a downturn line tie, the OG Swimmer stays shallow, making it ideal for surf anglers.
All of this is tied together in an extra hard body that's through wired and decked out with VMC hooks and a hand-tied bucktail teaser. And just like the Hogy needlefish, you won't find a rear hook on this lure, which is better for the fish, better for your hands, and easier on your wallet. This is all part of the Hook One platform, as well as Hogy's new core philosophy, quality for today, conservation for tomorrow. To find out more about this mission, and to pick up one of these premium OG swimmers, be sure to check out www.hogylures.com. So eventually, I obviously knew the herring were coming in from the salt. So I started adding in saltwater sides, beach locations where there were herring runs. And it's like I instantly forgot what I'd learned on the rivers, that the herring would run tight along the shore and the stripers would have them pinned up against there. So I get to the surf and those early times I would bail right out and go as deep as I could, and I'd start fishing right away. I caught some fish here and there, but I remember one night I heard something kind of come over my head, in the middle of the night in the dark. What the hell was that? I looked down. It was a great blue heron, which I have a fondness and a hatred for in the spring because they have scared me on enough occasions. They've almost landed on me.
Oh, they can scare the shit out of you. Oh, yes. And the noise. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I remember vividly. I can picture this in my head. This gray blue heron came over me. I mean, he's probably further away from me than I thought, but it felt like I could have reached out and smacked the thing, But what stuck with me is he flew down the shoreline and on dry sand on the beach. I was like, oh, maybe he's just resting. Nope, he immediately went into his posture of observing the water. And I stood there and I watched this bird 3/4 the size of me pick herring from, it couldn't have been 12 inches from where the little wash was. And I was like, you dummy. Yes, herring run tight to the shore, whether they're in the salt, whether they're in the rivers. Obviously, at times they're well out in the open, but in these places, if there's a shoreline, they're using that to their advantage. Now that spot, I can't walk there without remembering that, which is great because it reminds me each and every time that your first cast should be close. And I've replicated that short leash with a fly rod at this spot, with spinning gear. I've had my son Aiden. That's same thing I told him when we walked out to that spot in particular. I said, dude, this happened once. This is what you look for. Now he loves to see the great blue heron there. His first casts are that slap and that twitch, and Granted, yeah, again, you're going to catch fish out and around, but it's good to have those little things, those experiences to, at least for me, to solidify and mark the memory to remind me, because all the things we're doing season to season to season, we forget so many things. It helps me to remember that those herring are way closer than we probably would otherwise perceive them to be.
So close. So my dying question, and I think probably what a lot of people listening are also wanting to know, is that when you're doing this slap and slide, as I'm going to start calling it, slap and slide method, what are you using? What is your go-to couple of lures for this?
Well, like I said earlier, when I went back on my bait doesn't matter when I pack my bag. When the herring are around, I'm generally fishing shallower areas than normal, whether it's the rivers or those surf spots. So I'm starting with stuff that does not dive very much. That I'm unless it's a sinking lure like a sluggo or needlefish, which we'll get to in a sec. It's stuff that does not dive down more than maybe 2 feet. Because there's a lot of these places that, whether, again, river or open surf, is only 12 inches. And when a bass blows up in that, I mean, we don't get to see much. As night surf fishermen, it's tough to miss those explosions.
Yeah.
So my plug bag starts off shallow. The traditional, I see it all the time, and I think we might have even talked about it last spring, that like the Danny plug as the herring go-to. I might pack one, but I don't throw the Danny a lot for herring. I go for more stuff that, and this may be a factor of those early days learning herring around the rivers, things like the 9-inch sluggo could probably for me be the perfect herring lure, because you can run it shallow, you can run it deep, depending on your rigging. It's so versatile in that scenario. It sort of looks like, my plug bag looks like the 9-inch sluggo, some sort of a plastic swimmer, dependent upon the depth that I'm really working. If it's a real shallow spot, it's going to be the redfin. If I got a little more depth, then I'll factor in the bomber. I'll throw the Ozuri Hydro minnow. The redfin does get a lot of play in the spring for me, because again, it unloaded, just that stock redfin can be swam on the surface to just under, which is what a herring's doing in these locations. They stay, for the most part, once they get shallow, if you've got, let's say you're working on 3 feet of water, they're going to stay within the top 12 inches. That's just what they do. Right. They're not on the bottom. I've almost never seen them hugging the bottom. Even if you spook them, they still stay up top, very, very mullet-like.
Yeah.
In that regard.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we have a pretty similar approach. I think that for me, soft plastics make such a huge component of what I do in general. What thing I wish still existed that doesn't exist anymore that I would use in a similar manner of what we're talking about, what we're talking about shallow, is that Hoagie double wide. I wish they had kept that. It was really good for this kind of thing. It really was more like a twitch bait because it didn't have much body movement, but when you would jerk it through the water and it would kind of come up and then fall down and kind of come up and go down. Mm-hmm. But the size of it was right. The size of it, yes. The chunkiness of it was really good. So it's too bad. Maybe we can get them to bring that back. Hopefully they're listening.
One thing you noted there, though, that I do kind of play into my lure selection is and I've watched herring a lot. There's not a lot of wiggle there. It's something we've talked about in a lot of regards, but they, even coming across, if you've ever had the opportunity under daylight conditions to see herring working a current, whether it's in a small run, a large river, I've seen it in a lot of different places. They don't appear to be moving very much on a horizontal, but they're moving forward. Their little tail is just going on. So that's why the sluggo type of thing works so well, because sure, you can make it wiggle and move and dart and dance, but it really, when almost dead sticked or just barely brought across the current, it really accurately replicates what that herring does when it's cutting across. When it's like they slide across the current. It's somehow they're surfing it. They're not losing ground without imparting any motion. They just kind of go, and then they're there. And then they don't do the real wiggle craziness until it's that I have nothing else to do now but panic and get the hell out of where I am. That's when you see them go mental and wiggle and crazy and, look like more like a plastic swimmer wobble to them.
And it's just a burst, though. Like, when they do that, it really is short. Even when they panic, they don't go very far at that crazy fast speed, as I've seen other baitfish do. That'll burst, and they're, like, gone. They don't,
I've thought about that. I think it's because in a lot of the herring runs, there's a lot of them. So I think what they're thinking is, if I burst 5 feet, now 7 of my buddies are between me and death. It's like the joke, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just got to outrun your buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And then they blend back in. Right.
Yeah. So they just burst up, because like one of my spring herring spots, I'll take my son to, and we fish through the night, and we've never gone and not set the rods down, put our headlamps to white, and we've just chased the herring around. And while it's kind of fun and goofy, and like just silliness, we're not accomplishing anything, we're probably ruining the spot, if anything. It gives you the opportunity, though, to observe the fish moving, how those herring react when they're not being spooked, when they come into your light. And I've found they don't mind so much that light. If you just hang there and have your light on, they'll come in and like, hey, what's going on, dude? And then kind of go by. You start to move, they scoop.
Yeah.
And it's, it's very interesting. I mean, it's fun. It's not fishing, fun. But it helps if you can take something from it. Because I have learned a lot, again, like I said, of how they move, how they look, how they interact with their surroundings, with their other schoolmates. When that lone one gets on his own, what does he do? Versus when he's in a pack of 3 or 30. It's very different. So,
that's right.
There's a lot to learn from that, just observing. And that's one thing I've mentioned a few times with other baits. Bunker, I've watched a lot, but really the herring's cool because it's so shallow. They can be going through your feet.
Yeah,
and really get some good observations.
Yeah, literally. The last thing that I want to say, this is great, Toby, and I've seen you playing with the herring. You really get into it for sure, which is great.
Giggling like a schoolgirl.
Yeah. So do I. It's fun. But one thing that I want to mention, it's on my mind because we're talking about shallow, and I'm listening to you talking about how they swim, etc. One plug that I don't think I use any other time of year, but it always goes in my bag. First thing that goes in my bag when I'm around herring is a magic swimmer. And the smaller one, not the smallest one, but the smaller one. And I'm killing myself right now for not remembering this, because I'm just remembering it as we talk, because I can't give you the model number. But I believe Berkeley brought them back, and I think they have the right size. And the slow sink one is my favorite, because you can go really slow with it, and it's not like what I've seen some anglers do in the canal, where they whip it out there and they're just friggin' burning it back, and the thing's going swimming. It really is just barely breathing almost in the current, or not even current, because a lot of places I fish there's like not really any current for these, but you can fish them really shallow, and you can just sort of just move them along, and they just have that little bit of tail movement. And that plug for me, shout out to Dave Anderson. Dave Anderson was like, you got to have one of these. You got to have one. I'm like, dude, come on. Like, this is not, I don't know. And I had some other ones I had tried previously. And actually, I brought him to Montauk once, and a guy made fun of me about it. It was pretty funny early on when they first sort of came out. And I was like, I don't know. But he's like, you got to have them. It's like the one thing you got to have. You got to have some soft plastics. You got to have a redfin. You got to have one of these. And I was like, all right. And I only had one. I still have it. It's all beat up. It's silver. It's the only time I use it. I've changed the hook every year because it rusts, because I don't use it. Yep. But totally essential, and a great shallow water plug for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. As you were saying it, as you were starting to get to it, it popped into my mind as that is the same with me. It comes out in the spring. I started using it because of Dave. Another shout out to him for it. For that size, I have the one. It gets new hooks every year. But it does so perfectly replicate in so many ways the look and movement of the herring, and it's very versatile in those conditions for sure.
Agreed. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.